Howdy.
All right, well, I think that was the 2 minutes I was giving William, so we'll go ahead and get going. Good morning, Anthony.
Thank you. First of all, I'll introduce John. Thank you. Dr. Jon Radwan is going to give a wonderful book talk today. First of all, I'd like to thank everyone for coming. Thanks so much for coming to this talk today. And also, we have cookies and coffee if you're interested. So they're over on the website if folks want to have some refreshments. But Dr. Brown is going to talk about his books, Ethics and Contact Rhetoric, Communication and the Dance, Bodies and Power. So it's a real interesting topic about communication, bodily communication more than kind of verbal communication. So kind of an interesting way to look at it. So I'll hand it up to John, and thank you very much for it.
Thank you so much, Jerry. That was a fantastic introduction for somebody who got hired to do that job 5 minutes ago. He's right. I'm going to talk about communication, and I'm going to stress the nonverbal level of communication. And as you can see with the names here, I'm the lead of a research team. And so we've got our colleague, Dale Cyphert here. She's going to start off by telling you a little bit about why she joined the project and why contact rhetoric is an interesting area of research. And then I'll speak for about 45 minutes on the theme of how to draw communication. And then we'll wrap up with some question and answer. So with that said, Dale, we can see a little square here. Would you like to share a little bit about why you're on board with this project and why contact rhetoric is useful?
Well, sure. I'll start with saying I didn't exactly join the project. I think I've been on board since the project actually was born. John and I have known each other since grad school, so we go back to before either of us really knew what we were talking about, which kind of makes it sound like we do know what we're talking about now. John had been working on physicality for a long, long time, and I had been talking more about non-linguistic and non-symbolic communication, but he finally came up with this model, and that's what we started working on, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago now, trying to figure out how to actually visualize communication in a very different way. And so he wanted me to, ask a little bit about contact, so what? And I think the big so what for me is really this notion that we've got a vocabulary that we can work with. And so at this point, there are just so many questions left to answer, or we haven't even started to figure out everything that goes into approaching the physicality of human interaction as something other than non-verbal or non-symbolic or non-this or non-that, but to really start from a center that makes some sense. And so this book has been not John's first attempt at that, but we got together and really tried to unpack a lot of things in terms of what does it mean when you really start with the physicality, not just add on and not just say, oh, it's really important, but really start there. And so I think that's the biggest issue, is that we've created an attempt to look at rhetorical criticism with a different starting place. So my chapters, I tackled basically ethical and practical challenges of applying this contact model, which is an inherently interpersonal way of looking at communication. So much of rhetorical theory, you're starting with the orator talking to a group of people already at a sort of remove, the one-to-many kind of model, and starting with the interpersonal contact really changes a lot of things. It creates all kinds of different ways of looking at the one-to-many and many-to-many worlds of media that we just haven't done it before. So I think that's, for me, the biggest fun, the most fun, is that we've just never had a really a good mechanism to look at it from this perspective. And I think it's challenging, and it's interesting, and it's fun just to do something completely different.
All right. Well, thank you so much for that, Dale.
Sure.
I'm correct that Ellen's not here, right?
No, I'm here.
Oh, okay, great.
Can you not see me?
Yeah, no, I can't see you, but that's okay. I'm glad to hear you. One of my other other co-authors is Ellen Gorsevski from Bowling Green State University. And so Ellen, this prompt was kind of the same for you. Could you tell us a little bit about why you find contact rhetoric a useful perspective?
Yeah, so I have been working for my entire career thinking about nonviolent activism, and so much of nonviolence is trying to engage with one's interlocutor in a really physical, embodied way. And in the past 2 decades, I've been more interested in incorporating environmental activism and rhetoric into my research area. And so John's interest in Catholicism and Christianity's really radical modes of interaction, whether it's, we're looking at the Berrigan brothers jumping on a nuclear site to prevent it from being launched in the 1980s when there was so much nuclear saber rattling, or Nelson Mandela, before he went into prison, he was imprisoned for symbolically blowing up power lines. And so I started working with Dale and John on these really exciting ideas. And John took it to this whole other level by really taking some of these Labanian dance variables and applying them to how we communicate in nonviolent activism, to engage with the other and get them to think about, ethical issues and what they're doing wrong. So it's been just such an amazing joy to work with my two brilliant brainiac colleagues, and also Omar Schwartz, because they really pressed me to engage my chapters and develop them in deeper ways than I might have done on my own. So I'm just so grateful to them for letting me be on this wonderful journey of thinking about, how do we invite audiences in a different way, in a really deeply embodied physical way, to think about engaging with someone. And it's more relevant than ever in our current, socio-political, geopolitical context. So yeah, that's all I'll say for the moment. And John, did you have anything else you had in mind for me to mention? I'm trying to keep it
No.
brief.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Gorsevski. And as she
Thank
mentioned,
you.
Omar Schwartz is our third co-author, or fourth technically, because I'm first. And he's on Mountain Time. He's at the University of Colorado, Denver, so he couldn't join us today. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and get started. You have to move away before I can click. Nope.
Waverly, if you're at the laptop, you can click into the presenter view of the PowerPoint and then just click one of the arrows to the right, and then the clicker should work.
Yeah, that's looked like work. So as I mentioned, my theme is how should we draw communication? I'll open with two invocations. The first is from Rudolf Laban, the founding father of modern expressionist dance. I chose it to share his wonderful metaphor for collaborative human effort, the swinging temple. We want to glorify life, to see life, and every group of people presenting a work together in concerted action is in itself a living, swinging temple, which fleetingly erects itself and fleetingly disintegrates to make way for new creations. I love this idea because it's a social development of the concept that each body is a temple. Here, each group of bodies coming together swings spiritual meaning into and out of shared works by a committed muscular effort. Our institutions and daily practices are swinging temples of meaning and value. My second invocation is from Pope Benedict XVI's inaugural encyclical, Deus Caritas Est, God is Love. I chose it because I study religious rhetoric, and in this quote, he taught me that genuine persuasion and influence reach past words toward immediate care and loving response. A great example is the Easter foot washing ritual in this photo. He says, quote, "Those who practice charity in the church's name will never seek to impose the church's faith upon others. They realize that a pure and generous love is the best witness to the God in whom we believe and by whom we are driven to love. A Christian knows when it is time to speak of God and when it is better to say nothing and to let love alone speak. He knows that God is love and that God's presence is felt at the very time when the only thing we do is to love." So please keep these two ideas in mind. Our work swings temples of incarnate meaning, and only some of it involves speaking. God's presence is felt when we focus on achieving caring relationships. Love's meaning is bodily. It is mutual feeling. So you may have heard books have covers. It's a big deal. I've heard that there are a lot of judgmental people out there, and they are all looking at book covers. This morning, I'm going to share an exciting story about how I selected the cover for our new book. And so a book cover is a big deal. People are going to judge you by it. Even though I know this and everyone else knows this, I was busy writing the inside of the book, so I postponed choosing a book cover until about 1 month before the draft was due. Looking back on it now, the book cover is one case within a much larger questions about how to define communication and then how to draw it. I tried 4 different ways to answer this question, and I'm happy to say the book now has a cover, and contrary to my expectations, I do like it. I affirm that this question, how should we draw communication, should be held open. Like all big questions, engaging them together with care and sincerity is wise, and thinking you have the final answer is hubris. Still, I've studied and collaborated, and I have ideas about ethical ways to answer how to draw communication. So for here, right today, I ask you to please consider my thesis. Let's define it humanely. A humane way to draw communication is by centering interpersonal contact and tracing degrees of mutuality and balance within our embodied relational cycles. These are our dances. Meaning is dance. The art of dance is not just a metaphor. Instead, it provides a useful vocabulary for discerning ethics, meaning, and value within contact patterns. Here's the official names of my points. I've got 2 failures and 2 successes to talk you through. For my failures, the first idea I had was not to draw it at all. The second idea I had was to use AI. Those both failed. Later, I had 2 successes. My success came in following the instructions from the publisher and licensing the image. And then I also did it myself, especially for the internal diagrams. So when I get to this main point, that's where I spend most of the speech, I'll explain Shannon's mathematical dissemination model of communication, the Socratic dialogue model of communication, and then finally the chorutic model I developed based on the work of Rudolf Laban, who we started with. He's the founder of modern expressionist dance. So first, some books have no cover image, just maybe some text. After a little reflection and discussion, I felt like we were missing an opportunity. In rhetorical theory, kairos is the idea that communication windows are always opening and closing. I can't draw, but I would not let that stop me. Drawing's fundamental. Images structure meaning by adopting a point of view and selecting a frame. Center and edge and light and dark and figure and ground all work together to express your idea. Covers are going to be judged, and choosing not to have an image doesn't avoid that. After I gave up on not having a cover image, I reread our publisher's instructions and saw that they wanted me to pick one from an iStock gallery they had prepaid for. Both Roman and Littlefield said very clearly, don't use the AI tool connected to this gallery. I thought a stock gallery sounded too generic, and everyone knows AI is the hottest tool since Papyrus. So of course I thought, cool, I'll just find a different AI app to draw my cover image. I searched and I found Canva. Hi, William. And I can't really speak to how Canva works, but from the end user side, it involves typing. And I'm a rhetorician. I know about words, and I just wrote a book, so I had a lot of words to use. So I typed quite a few words into Canva for hours. It was fun. It was empowering. I could turn my words into imagery. So at the end, I had a cover that I thought would be successful. I shared it with my research team. They were supportive. So then I put it in my draft folder and forgot about it and went back to doing the content, editing the content. About a month after the deadline, my editor started asking questions about the AI image. It turns out they did not like it. I was kind of upset. Why do they even have an AI tool? I didn't use it. I used a different one. It turns out that they fear that any AI image is going to be a manipulated copyright image, and somebody's going to come trying to collect fees on that image. So, okay. I worked on it a long time, and still somehow it's really not mine. I can't prove that it's a unique image, even though I feel like it is. My super cool AI word art is not actual, it's virtual. It was a cover draft, and now it's about to be a slide illustrating my failure to draw communication. So I learned that the system's bigger than me, again, and to follow instructions, again. Would you like to see my AI image? Show it to you anyway. So nobody's allowed to use that. When I returned to the iStock gallery, I spoke with Dale and learned that I'd only been looking at one section of the gallery. I spent more time searching and I found a fantastic mandala. It's an ideal image, and not only because it's professionally illustrated and licensed. The Sanskrit word mandala translates as circle. There is a wisdom in circles, Chorea Sophia. Running parallel, Laban cites Pythagoras on the wisdom of circles. So the sacred mandala tradition is more experiential than representational. We're meditating on this image, dissolves inner outer binaries, and brings us toward an enlightened mystical union. When the image is engaged as a representation, its structure is remarkably similar to both the AI image and the chapter diagrams I'm about to show you. I had not planned to draw a radially symmetrical mandala with Hinduism's traditional four gates, and yet there it was in black and white. And then beyond this specific iteration, it's probably not supposed to be black and white. It's made for a coloring book and a henna mehendi tattoo. Bodies are one of the central images for the book, Ethics and Contact Rhetoric, Communication, the Dance of Bodies and Power. So somehow, without my direct efforts or intentions, we ended up with body art, a tattoo on the cover. So now that we've seen how the cover image will bring the book before judges, it's time to speak directly about the content of the book. It strives to center communication theory in contact and presents a choreotic dance vocabulary to critique more and less ethical relational cycles. First, I'll define communication, and then I'll explain how it operates in three modes: dissemination, dialogue, and contact. As we'll see, contact and the dance of bodies is the necessary precondition underpinning language and media. It's the substrate where symbolism and discourse can grow. So, what is communication? Here's one drawing of it from interviewstrategies.com. Defining communication and drawing communication are parallel challenges. Definitions render meaning in terms, and diagrams render meaning via figure and ground imagery. As you can see, even in this simple image, there's a lot going on. I think I can unpack it. First, as a term, communication has a clear Latin etymology. Munus singular and munera plural are the Latin roots for our English word communication. Moon processes are social and creative, involving our public gifts, works, and offerings. Taken broadly, munera patterns constitute the giving and receiving dynamics that connect and structure social relations from family through polity. So communication is meaningful giving and receiving. It's an extremely potent first term because mutual giving processes are capable of great expressive, creative, and fertile growth. In both theological and biological senses, life and existence itself is a gift received. Gods and or ancestors have given us all, collectively and singularly, to each and every one of us. Absent them, we have and are nothing. So in this deep ontological sense, humanity operates only within shared networks of relational givenness. No mortal being self-creates, no infant being intrafeeds, and no social being truly dies alone. Once given, lives are lived together. For better and worse, bless you, there's no way around everybody else. Interpersonal obligations and cultural duties are taken up, and ideas, energy, and resources are communicated, sometimes more and sometimes less, via complex gift cycles. Communication denotes the time, energy, and work we give one another. So for my points in this section, dissemination and dialogue are discursive gift dynamics, and underpinning both, contact marks our interpersonal gifts of embodied time and energy. Let's start with dissemination. This mode is graphed with Claude Shannon's mathematical model of communication. He developed this model in the mid-20th century and has become enormously influential. You've probably seen it before. It's the basic model for all digital communication. All of our technologies operate on this simple design. Still today, it's how many textbooks define communication. Sometimes communication is about getting a message from point A to point B. This is a natural and a technological challenge. In nature, dissemination is distribution of seed. In an electronic communication, it denotes a unilateral transmission that surpasses noise to reach a destination. One of the major limitations of the dissemination model, and especially this one, is that they assume or deliberately bracket and exclude ethics, meaning, and value. On the first page of his famous article, Shannon wrote that frequently the messages have meaning. Quote, "These semantic aspects of communication are irrelevant to the engineering problem." He developed the idea of signals, data, and bits to help us understand signal flow, long distance, tech, independent of ethical questions like equality or mutual agency. The receiver at the far end is like a hardwired link and passive, so signals are guaranteed delivery. This idea is foundational for machine communications and inaccurate for human communication. So if Shannon is avowing that he's not trying to draw meaning or ethics, only mechanistic transmission, then how can we draw meaning and value? For instance, equality between the source and destination is not part of this model. That's why we have spam filters to protect us from unilateral gifts that we do not want to read or hear. A unilateral transmission ethic is often met with a flat refusal, and justifiably so. Yes, some transmissions are good and useful, but if I answered every robocall coming into my phone, I wouldn't have time to answer all the spam clogging my inbox. Shannon may not have been trying to image an ethic, but having lived my entire life in a media sphere built on his model, I testify that being a target audience can be exhausting. To call this relentless stream of pushy, mechanized messaging communication may be technically true, but functionally it is depressing. For this point, I like a concept from John Durham Peters. It's called the threshold of incommunicability. To survive, every single one of us needs to develop a healthy threshold boundary, marking where we cannot and will not be reached. Thankfully, there's a lot more to communication than attempts at dissemination failing to reach past filters and barriers. Our second mode is called dialogic, after Socrates' philosophical dialogue. With dialogic ethics, speech, symbolism, and media are modes of interaction that create community. The ancient Greek logos principle is the speaking animal's distinctive capacity and existential need for words, meaning, and reason. The idea in this model is that people cooperate via speech and symbols to bridge gaps between them and build up shared meaning. Ontologically, people are separate individuals who can try to communicate with distant others. Ideally, this cooperation can be oriented toward knowledge and truth, as with a philosophical debate, or it could be oriented toward care, as with therapy. Realistically, false knowledge claims abound, and telling me that you're concerned about my car's extended warranty is a self-serving tactic, the opposite of actual care. This type of ethic tends to treat words and symbols as tools, meaningful forms that are distinct from users, floating somewhere in between us. In the rhetorical tradition, this is Aristotle's idea that ethos, pathos, and logos are the means of persuasion. Attention to tools and means in communication opens us up to a utilitarian ethic, elevating efficacy and use value over just or caring relations. As Hahn explains, notions of division and gulf preclude a contiguous ontology, interbeing. For a concrete example, teaching is generally considered a dialogic cooperation oriented toward truth. Parker Palmer is a contemplative pedagogy expert. His research argues that good teaching involves self-commitment, where teachers share love of their topics. In contrast, bad teachers are all the same. Their words float somewhere in front of their faces like balloon speech in cartoons. Bad teachers distance themselves from their subject and from their students. And so this matches my experience. A utilitarian approach to teaching and communication, treating words as tools and instruments to be used on students and other audiences is likely to fail. Bad teaching presumes distance and barriers instead of building relationships. We need to let go of notions of division and insurmountable gulfs between people. So how can we draw an ethic? Well, I tried. I did some research, and surprise, I found the equal sign. Think of it. Does the equal sign image equality, or does it just represent equality? I think of mathematical signs as more representational conventions, so it's interesting to learn that the inventor of the equal sign, Robert Ricord, thought he was creating an image of equality, not just an arbitrary sign. In Ricord's view, nothing could be more equal than two parallel lines. I like where he's going, but in traditional ethics, putting one line over the other indicates superiority, not equality at all. So to fix the equal sign, I decided to pull it apart and put both parties on the same plane. A dialectical commitment to truth adopts a shared horizon and a mutual method. Universally valid abstract truths operating above and beyond all particular experiences are pursued together side by side. This is the way bilateral communication ethics enact power parity with a balanced horizontal or flat dynamic. With equals on a flat plane, all devices of argument are equally available, and my transmission does not provide him of any mode of transmission. Rational language and symbolism, logos, serve as our shared medium. And in principle, each party has equal freedom of action. Beyond dialectics' pursuit of truth, bilateral communication ethics apply to a wide range of relationships and goals. The general dynamic is collaborative equality where no party blocks another. So in this figure here, each flat line represents a dialectical partner in a bilateral exchange. They are equals working side by side on the same plane and sharing the same medium and horizon. In real life, you probably noticed we're not equals on a flat plane. Specific encounters contrast with this plane because co-present others exert relational force. According to Simone Weil, quote, anybody who is in our vicinity exercises a certain power over us by his very presence, and a power that belongs to him alone. That is the power of halting, repressing, modifying each movement that our body sketches out. So in the abstract, ethical planes populated with equals are even, but in real life, we operate within a deep gravity well of relational being each time we come face to face with one another. Situated in specific places with specific others, interpersonal energies push and pull us into cycles where our orientation is more toward one another than to dialectic's discursive horizon. Participants advancing embodied events are necessarily drawn into one another's orbit. This interpersonal force is figured as a gravitational pull, a natural point below both parties that pulls the equals upright into face-to-face stances. So in the second figure here, each vertical line represents a person or group made responsible to an equal other by proxemic relational gravity. This brings us to our third mode of communicative gift. Choreutics is the field that studies embodied cyclical dances. It means that studying this mode Contact brings up a completely different set of ethical issues that reach far beyond symbolism or simple equality. In McLuhan's theory, our media are not separate from us at all. They are extensions of ourselves. Electronic media extend the central nervous system. In Jim Corder's rhetorical theory, we emerge toward one another, and as we do, loving contact becomes our relational standard, not effective transmission of messages. So what we're starting to get into with this mode of gift is nonverbal communication and how it's more fundamental than speech and media. And so I'm sure you've noticed we use contact to understand communication all the time nowadays. Every phone is full of contact lists. Every one of us uses them religiously to maintain our networks. We are all contacts, and our mutual relating builds up and drives our systems. Kinesics is the study of meaningful movement. Each muscular effort becomes a kind expressing self and manifesting meaning. Proxemics is the study of how space communicates. And as we move into the 0 point of space, we find much more than symbols or tools. We find bodies making contact. So in this image, the people could either be sharing a bond or starting a fight. In Eric Burns' transactional psychology, the stroke is the archetypal contact gesture of nurture and care, and the strike is contact's shift into aggression. With haptics, the meaning of touch, we find an extremely significant set of kinds. Life and death are both right here in our hands. Think about it. There's a fundamental difference between touching people and touching objects. When you touch an object, there's only one percipient. But when you touch other people and animals, we make contact, a simultaneous I feel you, you feel me joint event. Contact is co-felt touching with, and it's the source of human life. An unavoidable law of nurture insists that years of care and support are needed for any of us to survive. So in contrast to these contact cycles, a tactical relation is more unilateral and one-sided, like the dissemination model. It denies the mutuality inherent in touch with deliberate objectification of the other, treating them as an obstacle or a resource or a target rather than an equal. Use and abuse of the other are terrible enough, but touch can be even more potent. It's a source of death. In Simone Weil's terms, murder is corpsification, the ultimate strike, turning a person into a body. So by studying close interpersonal contact, we can start to see how communication issues are clarified, the ethics are clarified. Consider this image. There's a jillion acts flying through the air. I notice only a tiny fraction of them. A smaller fraction of what I notice sort of resembles some joint feelings. A smaller set still invites mediated contact, where we might start to use email. And then sometimes those media cycles yield material and personal fruit, like an actual contact relationship. So in this diagram, contact is our gravitational center, and symbolisms are expressed upward and outward. A simple example might be an animal rights campaign at your local dog shelter. Starting at the center, dogs are contacts. Pets and guard dogs are strokes and strikes incarnate. Many are loved and cared for and fully integrated into our systems, but many others are neglected and abused. They're objectified as burdens or dangers and shipped to shelters where basic care is mediated through tools like fences and gates and cell phones. An activist takes a photo and posts a plea for foster care or adoption. It's unilateral outreach, hoping for a response. Someone who feels like this dog might be family. Ideally, that imagery, a pixelated semblance of a dog in need, registers some virtual touch stirring heartstrings, and the pet could potentially be reintegrated into a family, and that system will be characterized by ear scratches and belly rubs. Sadly, many similar posts to get us to adopt dogs don't inspire responses. They are acts flying out past the horizon of incommunicability and radiating off the planet into space. Now let's return to equals, upright and facing one another. Contact is our necessary center of gravity. And when we lean away from the other, we initiate a more independent act orientation. The challenge here is that we're never alone. As we physically approach one another, our power to modify the movement of the other increases. In Catholic ethics, this is called the law of ecstasis. We will go out and encounter others. Not all neighbors need to be engaged, but it only takes one person to initiate a joint encounter. As we follow the law of ecstasis, our face-to-face engagements unfold. They can advance across an ethical range. We can do things at the top independently, so we do whatever we're doing by disregarding people nearby, or we can do it in the middle zone relationally, where we do whatever we're doing with the other in mind, or we can do it mutually, where the two fundamental contact gestures come into play, the stroke and the strike. We can be both mutually supporting and mutually fighting. So on a flat plane, the moral arcs appear static, but we all know that communication systems are living in a continuous process that co-perform work organically over time. They swing our temples. So the power dynamic in relational movement, I term it a gyre. As we approach and engage, each moment unfolds in the kinetic, muscular, proxemic, and haptic efforts that carve our orbit. Gyres trace degrees of balance in these large and small, moment-to-moment interpersonal moves. Knit together in simultaneity and sequence, gyres figure the balancing and imbalancing steps and turns that manifest power along an encounter's process. Repeated and patterned over time, our gyres mutually modify movements into more and less ethical social dances. Mutual agreement is figured along the x-axis. A balanced gyre relates parties in parity, as when we look at one another with an attitude of maturity and respect. So with this horizontal line indicating balance and acceptance, we can start off at the top. These acts we're agreeing to operate independently. We'll leave each other alone. At the middle, we're agreeing to operate in relation to one another. And at the bottom, we're agreeing to operate with closely coordinated mutual contact. Remember that meaning is muscular and danced. Symbolic representations are abstract, but contact is visceral. Two parties eventually mutually is an even, fair, and balanced muscular dynamic. Now, in contrast to balance, angled lines can indicate disagreement or conflict. One party is enacting unilateral force onto another, forcing degrees of mutuality where none was desired. Especially here in the West, independence has come to be valorized as a secure stance engendering masculine strength and superiority. Seen from within relational gravity, self-sufficient superiority reveals itself as a tragic and dysfunctional delusion. For example, in After Whiteness, Jennings explains the power dynamics driving slavery and settler colonialism. A rhetoric of superiority from the finished white man justifies subjugation and holds itself up for emulation. He says, quote, "The finished man was always the image held up and held out to colonize people in the process of Western education. The first work of that image is to create inadequacies. This is the energy inside the master-slave dynamic within the legacies of plantation and colonial education. The first word of self-justification that masters told themselves was that the slaves had deficiencies that needed to be addressed. Everyone must aim toward the finished man, toward self-sufficiency that overcomes their inadequacies." So in this system, everyone's aim is constricted and narrowed into recognizing only act power. Masters pretend to self-sufficient independence while creating inadequacy and using slaves. Plank-eyed and puffed, masters unilaterally force dependence and misery. So the middle zone is where slavery operates. The master imposes close contact and then partially withdraws. He divides himself from the enslaved, yet is relationally present to enforce continuous domination. Far from a self-sufficient actor, he depends on numerous slave relationships to advance unilateral will. In relational interaction, we orient the other to both their benefit and detriment. At the outer edge, participants are leaning away from one another. Independence's value is measured in relation to specific others. The world's one family, but not all family members can or should engage one another all the time. There are basic proxemic obligations that don't directly involve all the people nearby. A humane act trajectory would strive to do bystanders no harm, and when meeting the harmed, rendering aid as we proceed along our own arc. With inhumane act patterns, others are disregarded with an attitude of selfish indifference, trending into a delusion of pure independence and autonomy. These ethical failures are not merely symbolic. They are exerted in concentrated muscular and material efforts. So this is a big contrast to dialectics dialogic partnership. When we communicate unilaterally, we shut down access and inhibit or skew reflection with lies and specious argument, and we dehumanize both ourselves and the other. Unilateral angular moves engage others as objects rather than mutual partners. Truth is equally approachable by all, so demagogues and spellbinders minimize reflective distance, with rhetoric soliciting and provoking an immediate visceral reaction. Truth's horizon is still out there, but focus shifts away from it and toward personal agendas. Attempts at manipulation and control throw communication dynamics out of balance by replacing the horizontal, unforced force of a good argument with oppression's vertical domination. So attention to unilateral oppression and manipulation pushes ethics past equals in flat discourse toward embodied experiences in interpersonal contact and material exercise of power. With real-life encounters, physical force works at multiple levels to bend relational fields. Propaganda and soft sell messaging begin to oppress because they are unilaterally mediated, offering no option for response. Agitation and protest rhetorics step closer past symbolism into physical contact, as does state control, as with incarceration. Symbolism and performance blend and intersect, manifesting in relational dynamics that may achieve balance and equality, but frequently do not even try. Both eros and violence are co-felt, real and true, and they are not out there on a philosophical horizon. Racist rhetoric is a clear case in point. It is never merely symbolic and always bears on bodies, as Ta-Nehisi Coates explains. Quote, all our phrasing, race relations, racial chasm, racial justice, racial profiling, white privilege, even white supremacy, serves to obscure that racism is a visceral experience. It dislodges brains, blocks airways, rips muscle, extracts organs, cracks bones, breaks teeth. You must never look away from this. You must always remember that the sociology, the history, the economics, the graphs, the charts, the regressions, all land with great violence upon the body. So with racism's brutal contact dynamic, viscera are continually crushed into corpses, and this requires that ethical communication must assess something more than discursive abstractions and rational arguments. So to try to sum up, an imbalanced system skews our gyres, as when we face one another with an air of superiority or need, and it needs corresponding degrees of acceptance or disagreement. Forced or invited, when power is brought to bear and accepted, the gyre flattens out. Graft, mutual indulgence, agreement, and acceptance trend toward the horizontal, and angles represent non-mutual degrees of power brought to bear and resisted. So this all, believe it or not, brings us to dance. I really love this image from Salvador Dali because each partner has their own spin and they are also spinning together. Kenneth Burke famously pointed to the dance of bodies as humanity's shared substrate and dancing attitudes as rhetoric's substance. Underpinning all symbolic acts are whole persons, each of us born and reared in pain, sacrifice, love, and care. As we interact, a gravitational well of mutual responsibility orients each toward the other as our dances whirl and bloom and crash. Burke's dance ontology is revolutionary yet underdeveloped. Especially in his work on religion, Burke was more focused on discursive symbolism than physical movement. For a more holistic account of communication, dance principles can balance rhetorical criticism's logocentrism. In 1928, Rudolf Laban revolutionized choreography by replacing a classical Western aesthetic vocabulary that assumes objective perspective with an embodied grammar of the dancer's lived psychophysical experience. Today, his movement system is still widely used not only in dance, but also in theater and industrial movement design. Laban's central tenet explains that energy and space are fully interdependent. The contact orientation adds a third, equally interdependent social dimension, a gravitational center of gravity. Gravity highlights how solo dancing is an impossible abstraction. Physical space is invariably populated with others, and psychic energy is continually inspired and frustrated with contact with these others across one's entire lifespan. With dance, there are four dimensions: space, the directional aim of movement; time, the pace and range of effort devoted to acceleration and deceleration; weight, the dynamic force of a movement; and flow, the effort controlling how ongoing movements will change. Laban's phenomenology also proposes an attitudinal continuum, where one pole marks a fighting quality when the mover applies resistance. The opposing quality is indulgent, when a dancer endures, yields, and accepts. Both of these poles require psychomotor energy. Indulgence is not non-exertion, it is effort devoted to accommodating and adapting to prevailing movement rather than fighting and resisting. In dance, these attitudes are expressed in relation to regular gravity, and in communication, these attitudes are adopted in relation to the other, relational gravity. So if we reorient the four dimensions of Laban's dance theory and adapt them to attitudinal continua, we get a way to map relational effort with a very clear vocabulary that lays out our social dances or contact patterns. First, with space, when we understand it in terms of mutuality, we can approach or avoid one another. Full withdrawal is a fighting attitude because we're social animals continually drawn into one another's orbits. Similarly, with timing, we range across degrees of synchrony and asynchrony. Balanced relationships indulge one another's schedules to achieve degrees of sync, and independent people do an asynchronous dance as if nobody is watching. With the weight variable, we operate in concord when we concur about the seriousness and overall import of our relational dance. A simple example might be a marriage proposal. Concord reigns with acceptance, and discord characterizes rejection. With violence in the strike, a fair fight achieves concord in agreeing on the roles of engagement, but when war and fighting are lawless, discourse trends into chaos. Finally, flow is the prevailing mode of interaction within an encounter or event. Right now, we're advancing an educational flow oriented toward knowledge and truth. Listening indulges this flow, and anything else fights it. Hecklers and agitators everywhere work to disrupt flow, while the rest of us build up bonds of shared meaning and value. So when you put it all together, space, time, weight, and flow are the dimensions of our relational efforts. We fight and indulge one another across degrees of approach and withdrawal, synchrony and asynchrony, concord and discord, bonding and freeing. Putting all of these contact variables into an image yields a communisphere. In this figure, space, time, weight, and flow, each with moral arcs marking degrees of reciprocity, provides a visual image of relational effort. The outer edges of the sphere mark a zone of independent acts, and mutual effort or contact increases progressively toward the center. Independence at the edge of the sphere is gauged in relation to specific others or groups. Apparently, independent others are typically interacting with alternate others instead of you. At the center of the sphere, increasing degrees of intimacy are both vital and lethal. For social animals like us, cooperating near the center is always necessary, but full and healthy actualization requires specific types of contact at specific times. Parenting, education, and leadership, for example, are all kairotic, depending on relational timing for their success. Sometimes the dance is bilaterally balanced, so it's circular, and other times communications patterns are unilateral and forceful, so it's a wild gyre. The continuation of each ongoing dynamic is fought or indulged by everyone involved. Contact rhetorics target this essential socio-ethical matrix for life, manifesting their particular mode of encounter and arguing against the harms of opposing relational modes. So for my closing example, I'm super happy William's here now. I'm going to quote his paper from last semester. He was my very first students who chose to use the full communisphere in our course, Dynamics of Interpersonal Communication. He analyzed his relational dance with a classmate and with his mother. Let's start with the mother dance, mother-son dance. He wrote, quote, "For my mother, starting with space, the gyre would be a flat line and really close to the center. The line would be flat because the attitude is indulging and not fighting. And the gyre would be close to the center because we live in the same house and there's physical contact between us. For time, the gyre would be a flat line, but this time it would be further from the center. The line would remain flat because the attitude is still indulging, but the line would go away from the center because there is not much time spent together, so we're not in full sync. For weight, the gyre would be a flat line and the line would go closer to the center. The line would continue flat because we're indulging, but the line would get much closer to the center because the relationship holds a lot of weight for both of us. Finally, for flow, the gyre would be a flat line and the line would be closer to the center. The line will remain flat because the attitude will still be indulging. It goes closer to the center because we have a binding relationship. Next, here's William's description of the classmate dance in yellow. For space, if we're talking about physically being in the same classroom, the gyre will be flat and close to the contact center, but not too close because we are sharing the same space, but not touching. For time, the gyre will be a flat line and we far from the center because besides class, we are not coordinating our schedules. For weight, the gyre will be a flat line and the line will be far from the center because our relationship holds almost no weight. Lastly, for the flow, the gyre will be a flat line and the line will be away from the center because we are not binding in this relationship. So again, note that these both are relatively balanced gyres, circular, not extreme angles, as we saw with slavery. So to start wrapping up, the communisphere is how I've chosen to draw communication. It centers physical contact to make the law of nurture operate like gravity, and it traces moral arcs across 4 dimensions drawn from dance: space, time, weight, and flow. So now we have an answer to the question about drawing communication. Draw it ethically, draw it humanely. One ethical way to draw it is to center interpersonal contact and trace degrees of mutuality and balance with embodied gift cycles. Meaning is dance. So to summarize, I learned a different lesson from each of my attempts to draw communication. First, not drawing really doesn't achieve much of anything. Artists mostly just need to know how their medium works. They need to know its limits and strengths. You need to attend to what drawings can and can't do. All drawings freeze processes into static images. They require a frame and a distance point of view, a careful rendering of figure and ground, and all of this work is worth it because vision is fundamental and drawings are worth many, many words. For my second failure, using AI, I learned about a new app, Canva, that's got a cycle of words, machine, imagery, more words. As you repeat that cycle, you can go through progressive iterations of your image. It was really creative and fun, especially for me as a word person, because vocabulary terms and precise definitions seem to directly enable vision without drawing skills. We just need to remember that AI is virtual art, not real, so don't plan on using it for very much. Third, the mandala cover came out better than I could ever have hoped for because its principles fit the ancient wisdom of circles. Finally, doing it myself, this worked out wonderfully because rhetoric really is about, according to John Battista Vico, ingenium, invention, creativity, and critique. Instead of skipping out on drawing communication ethics, we can build up the meaningful more. All it takes is studying how to meet the challenges of our medium. So with images, it's what's the center, what's the edge, how we're going to orient to it. We're going to select our research terms carefully and fully define them. Exactly what is communication? Meaningful, giving, and receiving. And so my basic advice to everybody is to collaborate, learn, go through multiple iterations, share, adapt, and grow, and then ultimately follow Seton Hall's motto and go for it. So this is my closing. There you have it. A book that used to be an idea now exists right here. It's got a cover and I like it. It's symbolism pointing beyond itself toward billions of bodies living forth. Touch, dance, and all joint movement prove that consubstantiality is no discursive fantasy or lie. Community has been and is still unfolding. Our team's contact pattern didn't fizzle. It grew into such fullness that its trace beckons. We found a perspective formative and fruitful. We rounded out the attitude and worked out the initial steps. The floor is alive in relational rhythm and warm press. The vision is only one move, not an ontology. Justice and mercy are observable and repeatable engagement patterns, not impossible ideals. So with that, I'll close. I will ask you to please use your phone to give some feedback via our super cool QR code, which is right there. And I'll take us now into question and answer. Thank you so much for listening. Could I take a question from Lisa?
Start off with many. I mean, this was cool. I had never really thought about communication this way, but because, as you know, I'm from a certain theologian who talks about the world being mediated by meaning and community being based on shared meaning. So where in this wonderful diagram would you get a situation where you're trying to have an interdisciplinary conversation and, you know, everybody's willing, everybody's indulging, but we really don't speak the same language. We don't have shared meaning. You know, we talk about being siloed. Sure. And I wonder where that would sort of fit in, where all the intent is good, but the outcome just kind of doesn't happen because of that barrier.
Okay, good start. So different disciplines have different languages, as you described. I would first point to everybody's at the same meeting. So that's already massive progress compared to siloing, where everybody's in their echo chambers speaking their languages to each other. So my, it would be like an emotional feeling type of answer, where I would feel hope if we all came out of our silos to come to an interdisciplinary meeting and try to work. And so it's not going to be easy and instantly happen where we all suddenly get our same language going. But interdisciplinary work is important and it inspires me, and it's a feeling of hope. It's not like you're going to fix it right away. It's going to take many meetings, and if we keep hoping together, eventually we can build something together. And you were citing Lonergan for your theologian, right? So incarnational meaning is something that I learned about from Lonergan. I sort of already knew what it was, but somehow hadn't connected religion to communication, and Lonergan was the person that helped me do that. Incarnation is one of Lonergan's modes of meaning. Can I take a question from anybody else?
In the start and a little bit towards the middle, you talked about, well, I mean, kind of throughout dances, like impact on your specific study and exploring that. And you brought up two specific dance styles of dance, being modern and ballroom. What, if any, other genres were you able to kind of find influence or explore throughout kind of preparing your book, and why did those two specifically stick out to your head?
Yeah, great question. I am a dance amateur scholar. I found Rudolf Laban after looking at all the other dance theorists and seeing that their vocabulary assumed distance. It assumes a perspective of the audience watching the dance on stage. Laban is much more about the psychophysical movements of the dancers themselves. And so I said, hooray, I can finally understand and find a use for something out of dance theory. And so his mode, I'm sure he could have done ballroom dance, but his mode is expressionist dance, where you're bringing some of your own personal adaptations and meanings to it, rather than a precisely choreographed traditional step like you might find in ballroom. So I love all dance, but if I have to pick one, it's something more in Laban's tradition of expressionist dance. And then very quickly, it starts to become a metaphor for me for kind of all social interaction, that we're all bringing our improvisations to our relational movements with one another. And so some of our events are very tightly choreographed, like a ballroom dance. So sort of like here today, it's pretty tightly choreographed, right? You all know where you're supposed to sit. I know that I'm supposed to stand up here. We know how we're going to move together in this space. Something that would be more expressionist oriented would be more free, like maybe a social event where we could circulate freely throughout the room. and build relationships on our own motives rather than trying to perform the steps that a tradition handed down to us. So mostly I need to study more dance, but when I spent time at the library, Levon was the only theorist that had something that felt to me like I could take it and use it to explain how nonverbal communication works. Thank you for your question. Could I field a question from anybody else? Sure, go ahead.
You said that you study dance. Do you dance?
I'm a musician. So I dance when I'm feeling happy, but I wouldn't say it's like good dancing that I'm proud of or anything like that. I could try a few moves right now, but I would look like our president, so I won't. Music is a dance, right? The fingers move in rhythm. I play the bass guitar. They move in rhythm to create meaning, to create the performance, to create the art. It's just kind of a micro level dance, fingers on the strings. And so a full body dance is what actual dancers are doing, like with ballroom or expressionist dance. And so the short answer is, well, yeah, kind of, sort of, but really it's all a dance. It's not just a metaphor for me anymore. It's something that we do. Our cycles take us through life. And really that's one of Levon's biggest things. The swinging temple is bodies who are already temples coming together to form a larger temple, a joint temple. And those temples are not operating on lines like the dissemination model where they're going off to some future and leaving some past behind. Instead, the swinging temples go in cycles through society. So like the university is a cycle. Students keep coming every year. Thank you. I keep working here every year. So each time I teach a class, it's a new group of people, but it's the same cycle. Every once in a while, I get to branch off a little bit and do a new cycle. So like I'm teaching nonverbal communication for the first time this semester, and it's very exciting. But when you come right down to it, the rhythm is the same. We start in the same beginning of the semester. We got the same spring break. We got the same finals. So they're all dances. And so even from micro level movements like your fingers to macro level movements like a university semester, I don't want to call it a metaphor. It is a dance. Sure.
Question, but Dale and Allie did send comments in.
Great.
I believe it was to Lisa's question. Ellen had said multidisciplinary. Oh my gosh, multidisciplinary is a dance that can be smooth or frustrating. And Dale had chimed in and said any language or even babies babble. This is what I describe as learning a new dance. Lots of missteps that must be approached with, as Jon says, hope.
That's a good research team when they back your answer. I guess that's reminding me that they're here, and I just heard Dale cough. Did anybody have a question for our co-authors who are joining us remotely from Ohio and Iowa?
Wish you were here.
We wish you were here, guys. All right, well,
Yeah, me too.
I'm not hearing any other questions. Oh, go ahead.
Could we do a little plug for when we have our contemplative community week, which I don't know when the next one is going to be. We in the library run a coloring event where we have a great many manuals to be colored, miscommunication. Some of them are really beautiful. So watch for the announcement about that. It'll probably be sometime next semester.
I think it's going to be early next semester. In addition to the coloring event, I direct our Institute for Communication and Religion, so we always make a contribution to Connect with Community Week. And this year, it's looking like we'll be able to bring in a guest scholar to teach us meditation. And so look for announcements probably late September into October.
Shame the site.
Okay, so hearing no further questions, I thank you again. Don't forget there's cookies and coffee right over there. Please get yourself some on your way out. And then again, really thank you for coming. This has been a wonderful dance together. Have a beautiful day.
Thanks, Jon. This was fantastic. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Ellen.
Goodbye to everybody. Glad we could join you.
Bye, Dale.